That didn't take long. Right on. Okay, so I'm Chris Ingdahl, and this is Carly Blimmel, and we are with SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We're going to talk today on the intersectionality of climate change and Indigenous mental health. So as we get started, Carly's going to kind of take the way, and we're going to go down that path, and then at the end, or towards the end rather, I'm going to go over the regional offices, what we do, and I'm going to provide a bunch of resources that we have from SAMHSA. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carly now.
Thank you. Haloto, hello. So chofoya Carly Blimmel, chotasia, Tawahina Amitili. My name is Carly Blimmel, and I am Choctaw. I am from a small community in Oklahoma called Tallahena. I'm also from a small community in Northern California called Mount Shasta or Dunsmuir. And we can go ahead and slide. This is good. It's good for the nerves. It gives us something to do with our hands. As Chris said, we're going to talk about climate change and Indigenous mental wellness. The things that we're talking about, I'm going to talk about specifically with Indigenous mental wellness, but a lot of these concepts can be applied broadly for just mental wellness. Today, we're going to explore the impacts of climate change and disasters on the mental health of Indigenous communities, in case I didn't already say that enough. And then we're going to talk about SAMHSA resources. Next slide. While I'm talking today, I'd like you to be thinking about this question. How have climate change and natural disasters specifically impacted Indigenous communities in terms of their behavioral health? And I'm going to ask later if anybody can share specific examples or observations from your communities. Next slide. So, one of the things, since we've been at this conference, we've been talking to people, something that we hear is like, well, I didn't even think about mental health in terms of climate change, natural disasters, emergency preparedness, right? So it's like, why are we even here? So this is a fancy little Venn diagram that we all learned about in 8th grade. And it shows the overlap between SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, mental health, and environment and climate change. Next slide. Some of these slides are adapted from our Disaster Behavioral Health Department under SAMHSA. This is one of those that's been adapted. I have resources for most of this information. If anybody wants to email me later, I can get those to you. So this is a cool slide that talks about the concept of place and why place is so important. I'm going to ask everybody to do an exercise with me if you feel comfortable. I'm going to have you close your eyes. And I'd like to have you imagine yourself in a place where you feel safe, whether it's someplace from your past, someplace you want to go, someplace that makes you feel safe and happy. Just imagine being in that place right now. I'd like you to look around that place and notice the things that are in that space that you can see. I want you to think about the sounds that you hear where you're in that space. Can you smell? Are there any smells in that space? And then I'm going to have you come back to me. Okay. When we talk about place, it's more than just a physical space that we occupy. It's sense, it's memories attached to it. When I do that exercise, I think about being in my grandmother's kitchen, specifically her kitchen. There's smells, there's sounds, there's history there, memories, relationships, people. So when we talk about place, it's not just a physical space that we occupy. It is memories, smells, connection, our ancestry, value beyond what can be seen, cultural significance, right? Some people's peaceful place might be their ceremonial grounds. And when we speak about Indigenous people in this context, we're referring to about 700 diverse communities and tribal nations, right? Federally recognized tribes, tribes trying to get federal recognition, just Indigenous people that have been displaced or found themselves in our areas. Next slide. So how does climate affect mental health? This is my little turtle island here. When we think about climate change and climate disaster, we think about things like hurricanes, altered rainfall, wildfires, rising sea levels, drought, heat, and ice layer variations, right? These are the actual physical things that happen. And what that impacts, it impacts biodiversity changes, right? The plants and animals in these spaces. It impacts food access, can impact crop failure, which then impacts other things like employment. It can impact our access to clean water. It can create displacement, and we'll get more into that in a second. As well as, and this is one of those kind of unique things, is habitat loss and loss of cultural and traditional sites. And all of those things then impact health. And I don't differentiate between physical health and mental health. It's health. Our brain is an organ in our body. Keep trying to convince people of that. It's arguably an important one. Our cultural and spiritual health is all part of health, right? These things are interconnected. Our community health, that's part of our health, right? This is the whole person view of health. So we get from climate change and how that impacts health through all of these mechanisms. Next slide. It's all stuff I already said. Next slide. So we know that climate impacts mental health. This is not some like brand new groundbreaking concept. These are just some headlines that I pulled from various newspapers. It impacts us in a very real way. It impacts our ability to function, can cause things, can impact things like depression, anxiety, panic disorder, suicidal thoughts. And we know this because we've been impacted pretty significantly in the last, so many years. Next slide. So specifically speaking about Indigenous communities, we're looking at the different phases, the different ways that these things affect us, the immediate trauma and loss, and the chronic stress of these events. Loss and grief associated with the immediate aftermath, losing loved ones, losing your home, losing pets, your land, items, beloved things, and I'm hopefully remember to touch on that in a minute too. And then the prolonged stress of uncertainty and displacement. Cultural loss of traditional sites, we touched on that, but it can cause a profound grief, identity, and heritage loss. As Indigenous people, and especially those of us that belong to federally recognized tribes, we have three things to be federally recognized. We have to have a spoken language, a unique, identifiably unique culture, and a land base. And things like natural disasters put that at risk. That literally puts us at risk of extinction for some communities. So I cannot overstate how important this link is. So then we start talking about displacement, right? Disconnection, forced relocation. Is anybody in here a product of relocation in the 40s and 50s? Yeah. So we have relocation, we have forced removal, we have these incidents in our past of removal, right? Of being taken from our place and placed in other areas. And that fractures our communities. It can increase feelings of isolation, losing our protective factors like our support and our culture. And that loss of identity can exacerbate already existing mental health issues. So we think about losing other beloved things. I think about that. I think about my people were on the Trail of Tears, and they could only take what they could carry. And the things that they chose to take with them were pottery, bowls, baskets, things that have been in their family for generations, right? Losing something like that can be really significant, not only to the person experiencing it, but for generations down the line. Next. Young people are particularly affected by climate change due to developing nervous systems and a sense of inherited responsibility. I already talked about culture and language loss and how that is a really very real threat. Ecological grief, the sense of loss from environmental destruction, which deeply affects Indigenous communities tied to the land. And the thing that's really important about this is to acknowledge it, talk about it. If you're experiencing these things in your communities, to not just gloss over that this is impactful in ways that we don't always see or we don't always attribute whenever there is a climate event. Next. This is just a little graph to show that all of these things are interconnected. And when we talk about compound trauma, that can be in one's lifetime, that can be over generations. So the burden of natural disasters can overwhelm the capacity and ability to cope, right? And that's what we would call a crisis, is whenever your natural ability to cope is overwhelmed and you can no longer do that. Protective factors are really important. Some of the protective factors are affected by these events themselves. Next slide. So the thing about resilience, if you identify as Indigenous, if you're Indigenous, you've probably heard throughout your lifetime that Natives are resilient, right? Indigenous people are we're resilient. We hear it all the time. We're resilient. We're resilient. And sometimes it's like, man, you kind of like to take a break from being resilient. But the good thing about resilience is that it's not a fixed attribute. It's not something you have or you don't have. This is something that can be flexed. This is something that can be grown. This can be formed. Resilience is a muscle, basically, not really, not technically, metaphorically. And then we're looking at the cascading benefits. Action on climate issues can lead to the cascading benefits, improving mental health outcomes, right? So we think about addressing things like climate change, you are addressing mental health outcomes. Even just the act of taking responsibility and taking action in those areas can be a protective factor themselves. Next. Support. Okay, that was all super depressing. So what do we do about it? Community-based support, strengthening community-based mental health support systems that are culturally informed and integrate traditional healing when it's appropriate, based on your individual culture, right? This is not a one-size-fits-all thing. Calling on the wisdom of traditional stories, games, traditions, the guidance of elders in the community. I'm gonna tell a story, that's why I'm checking my watch. Okay, so think about traditional wisdom, right? And I think about, this conference has been amazing. I was thinking, what are the stories that my people have about environmental knowledge? And we have a story as a young Choctaw boy in a village, Nakni is our name for boy. And Nakni was a terrible hunter. And everybody in his village kind of made fun of him about it. He could bring home rabbits and squirrels, but he never got a big deer. All the other boys were bringing home big game for their families, and Nakni was ashamed. So he went out into the woods. He said, I'm not coming back till I get a deer. So he was out in the woods for 3 days, and he was about to give up. And he came across a dried creek bed, and there's chanchuba in the creek bed, is the alligator. My people come from where there's alligators. And Chanchuba was in this dried up creek bed. He was in a bad way. And he said, Nakni, if you'll take me to the water, do you know where the water's at? If you take me to the water, I'll tell you a secret. And Nakni was like, no. The moment I get too close to you, you're going to eat me. I'm not going to do that. And he said, no, I'll tell you all the secret. I'll tell you the secret of how to be a great hunter. Your people will never be hungry. I just need you to carry me to the water. He said, no. And Chanchuba said, you can tie up my mouth, you can tie up my feet, and I won't hurt you, and you don't have to untie me till you get me there. And Nakni felt bad, out here in this dried up riverbed or creek bed. He couldn't make it to water on his own. He hates to see another animal starve. He knows what it's like to be hungry, right? Because he's a bad hunter. So he goes up and he ties up Chanchuba and he puts him over his shoulder and he takes him to the river and loosens him and goes away back so he can't get him. Chanchuba gets in the water and he goes down and he comes back up and he goes back down and he comes back up. He does this 3 times. And the 3rd time, it was a long time. And Nakni thought maybe he kind of got had. And then Chanchuba came up and he said, okay, I'm going to tell you the secret to being a good hunter. He said, you're going to go out in the woods. He said, the first thing you're going to see is a yearling, a young little baby. Don't shoot it. That baby's going to grow up. It's going to be a big, strong doe and have lots of babies one day. And he said, keep going. It'll be a while. And then you're going to see a big doe. She's going to be real fat. She's fat because she's pregnant. Don't kill her. She's going to have lots of little babies, and it's going to feed your people for generations, these babies. And he said, you're going to keep going. You're going to see a good-looking young buck. Don't kill him. That young buck is going to breed lots of does, and they're going to feed your family for generations. Don't kill it. So you're going to keep going. And you're going to see an old, gray, big buck. Go ahead. Kill him. Take him down. You take that buck back to your family, and you'll never have problems hunting again. You'll always be a good hunter if you follow those rules, right? So Nakni did what he said, and he went out, and of course he saw the little deer and the does. Oh, he's been hungry. It's been 3 days since he's eaten. He's hungry. It was hard for him to let that little tender doe go by, but he did. And he killed the big buck. He took it back to his family. Everybody celebrated. Everybody was so proud of him. He's no longer the bad hunter in the village. Graduated up from berry picker. And so from then on, Choctaws have always been great deer hunters because they follow those rules, right? So I think about traditional knowledge. They're there. They're in our stories. They're there. We just have to listen. We just have to look for them. We just have to apply them. So when I say like using those traditional stories, those games, whatever they are in your community, and it doesn't have, Indigenous communities, every community has their norms, their traditions, their stories. Use those things in your communities as they're appropriate. Creating disaster preparedness and resilience programs that address the socio-emotional aspects of disaster. Integrating culture and tradition into the programs as they're appropriate. Advocating for policy. All of these things are protective factors, right? My background is in tribal health, and I integrate in my clinical work, I would integrate tradition and culture, our traditional games, into everything, because I don't think that there's a division there. So when we start looking at building these emergency preparedness programs, making them culturally specific, pulling on the wisdom that we already have, which has been really cool about being at this conference. Next. Okay, good, about done. So another question to think about, and we're gonna open it up, I think, in just a second, but how can Indigenous knowledge, cultural practices, and traditional healing methods be integrated into behavioral health services and disaster response efforts? Can anyone share examples of successful initiatives or programs in your community? Chris is gonna go through a lot of our SAMHSA resources in a second, lots of QR codes, we'll get there. We have disaster behavioral health toolkits and things like that he's gonna talk about. So those things will definitely be in the slides. But before we move into that section, I wanna open it up for questions or comments about how you see this play out in your community.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ashley Pomona in Norfolk Rancheria. Just recently we started doing more gatherings. So recently we took our tribal elders and some of our youth to do acorn gathering events, and it brought the families together, shared stories out there. The elders also explained what we gather, when we gather, why we gather. So just like some of that natural healing that, our youth doesn't normally see, because they're all caught up in their electronics and into the day-to-day, activities of sports and stuff. So getting them back out into Mother Nature and, singing songs to our Black acorns and thanking Creator for giving us our food supply, and also walking and doing what our elders, our ancestors have done, has been a lot of our behavioral health. You see the changes in our youth, and they have a different outlook on life. They start talking and sharing more. So it opens them up in communications. And then the elders just thrive off that younger generation, and them being interested in the culture. And that's really helped. And we just recently started that with our tribal cultural heritage program.
Thank you. Yeah, those are great examples of those protective factors. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Oh, we got one.
Hi, I live on the Klamath River on Karuk land in Orleans, and it's right where the Yurok and Karuk reservations come together. And we've had our schools, like really recently, it's been kind of an intergenerational struggle for dam removal and bringing fire back to the landscape. And now the dams are down and the fish are going home, and there's so much prescribed burning that like our towns are not burning down anymore, whereas the upriver towns where this stuff isn't happening are. But our schools are starting to embrace, and the group I work with works on this a lot, getting the education into the schools and doing field trips. And so they're actually doing field trips to the dam removal and yesterday they went on a prescribed burn field trip. And so the kids, we teach them that their parents and their grandparents made that happen. And so it's like all of a sudden it's been so much the salmon are going away. There's so much despair. There's so much suicide. But recently it's been there's hope back, because the last couple fires haven't burnt our towns down, and the dams are coming out, and the kids are kind of seeing the results of the climate action their families have taken. So it's kind of a beautiful thing, and we're hoping to study it, but we might need advice from people like you. But it is prevention, and we've been able to convince some funders and the state that it is prevention, and we need this stuff in the schools specifically so everyone can engage.
That's awesome. That's a great example also of those protective factors and using action. That's amazing. I got goosebumps.
Hi, my name is Carmen Gonzalez, and I'm not working with through any particular tribal program right now. I was born on an area of land that used to be Navajo Nation, that by act of Congress in 1974, me and my family were forced to relocate. And so I'm a refugee and an alien on my own land and not allowed to go home. But so I worked in environmental for a long time under tribal programs. But a couple of years ago, I did a TED Talk that got published online. And last November, I got somebody reached out to me from one of the communities of people that have been resisting the relocation for 50 years and refused to leave. And I didn't know there was anyone still living on that land. And they asked me if I could come home and help because I'm a rainwater harvester. And there are people who don't have drinking water and don't have power that are still resisting relocation. And the devastation is immense. I've been struggling with PTSD and suicide ideation my entire life, even while having, a pretty successful environmental career here. But going home, watching a group of the most resilient people who have been on the front lines of resisting mining and colonial power has been totally transformative. And the community I'm working with at Black Mesa in Arizona have been gathering on their own with no funding and no support. And over the past year, they have self-organized and have started using Navajo fundamental law to guide bringing the community together and decision-making. And what they're doing is they're bringing all of the women together to have these circle discussions that based on the traditional Navajo laws of peacemaking. So we get together in a hogan and come and discuss, and every discussion is focused around watershed restoration because that's the primary focus. The mine took 1.3 billion gallons of water and polluted the aquifer. And this community can't apply for federal funding, or they can't get EPA grants. There's no sort of outside help that's been able to come in. And watching the healing that unfolds using Navajo fundamental law for peacemaking around water, all these conversations happen about the effect on the mental health of the children and all the people that have committed suicide. And the community coming together in this way has now resulted in, we started doing spring ceremonies again with medicine people on the land. And next spring, we're going to gather with other people who've been relocated from this land and do a medicine ceremony where we fall asleep on the mountain like Changing Woman did when she came over from the Pacific. So I just thank you for sharing the story you shared and the story you shared too. Yeah, everything is already held in the stories and in our origin stories and in our original instructions for healing the earth and finding peace in our hearts. And for the first time in my life, I'm not suicidal. So just thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. It's nice to hear from you again. Thank you. Anyone else before we go forward? We'll have some more question and answer at the end also. I think the next one's another question, but we might have already gotten there. So next slide. So let's think about this as the next question that we talk about. Barriers that prevent Indigenous communities from accessing adequate behavioral health services. Right? That's what we would also really like to hear about. But I'm going to let Chris talk some more about the services that SAMHSA offers and how to access those. So Chris and I are both regional behavioral health advisors. He's Region 6, I'm Region 9. The great thing about the SAMHSA regions is we all have these different backgrounds and expertise and subject matter expertise. And I come from a tribal background. Chris has worked in disaster emergency preparedness. And he's also he's a California native, so.
Thank you, Carly. Oh, thank you all. Well, okay, so I'm going to have you think about this as I go over these resources. So in what ways can SAMHSA show up for your community in this area? So I'm going to go through the resources and we'll kind of think about these concepts as we go. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is our regional offices, and we can see Region 9 there. And that is ran by Director Captain Emily Williams, and that again is Carly's region. Region 6 is where I hail from, and that is ran by Regional Director Christy Brooks. You can see all of our contact information there, and it's important to know that this regional map can be found at samhsa.gov. So if you were ever looking for somebody to help you out in any questions, comments, or concerns, mental health or substance abuse related, that's where you could find it. I'd also like to add that we are led by the Assistant Secretary of the Substance Abuse and Mental Health, Dr. Marian Delphin-Rittman. Next slide, please. So the SAMHSA Regional Office's purpose is to harness the knowledge, expertise, and innovation across the country to advance behavioral healthcare systems. And this is done through leadership, partnership, and consultation. Next slide, please. So in crafting our new mission and vision, we felt it was critical to highlight the importance of a person-centered care and the need to connect people with the continuum of mental health and substance use providers, services, and support. The 2023-2026 strategic plan facilitates actions to help move forward the integration of behavioral health into all healthcare programs and systems, develop a well-trained, diverse, and culturally competent workforce, reduce incidents and the mortality related to the overdose and suicide, and provide the resources needed to develop, support, promote, and sustain children, youth, and their families. Next slide, please. Okay, so the external key drivers for the SAMHSA plan. Our strategic plan, in part, is driven by initiatives elevated by the White House, Congress, and HHS. For example, the Unity Agenda, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and the HHS Strategic Plan, and the Health Workforce Strategic Plan. It's SAMHSA's intent that the 2023-2026 Strategic Plan unite these efforts by facilitating actions to help fully integrate behavioral health services and supports with all healthcare programs and systems, develop a well-trained, diverse, and culturally competent workforce, reduce incidence, prevalence, and the mortality related to overdose and suicide, and provide the resources needed to develop, support, promote, and sustain children, youth, and their families. Next slide, please. So in order to achieve this mission and vision, we've identified 5 key priority areas to help better frame our efforts in addressing the behavioral healthcare needs of individuals, communities, service providers, and those key priorities are preventing substance use and overdose, enhancing access to suicide prevention and mental health services, promoting resilience and emotional health for children, youth, and their families, integrating behavioral and physical health care, and strengthening the behavioral health workforce. Next slide, please. So our work is also guided by 4 key principles that are being infused throughout the agency's activities. Prioritizing equity, trauma-informed approaches, recovery, and a commitment to data and evidence across all policies and programs will assist us in enhancing our mission and vision. And the 4 principles are integrated through each priority area. Okay, so Next slide, please. At this point, I'm going to ask if you want some of our resources that you could take your phone out, and we're going to go through a whole bunch of QR codes here. And fun fact, that adorable little cute puppy is actually Carly's fur baby. So at first glance here, we can see that SAMHSA, we do have apps. So you can go on any app platform and type in SAMHSA, and you'll be able to find these applications. Next slide, please. So the Disaster Technical Assistance Center, or DTAC. DTAC prepares states, territories, tribes, and local entities to deliver an effective mental health and substance use related response to disasters. DTAC can be found at samhsa.gov or that QR code. DTAC is an interesting concept, and they have their own director, and we are a great resource for you to get you connected to that. And interestingly, disasters can be natural and they can also be man-made. And so we have services and tools and toolkits and such for every concept throughout that. And there's also grants available depending on the disaster and the concepts behind that. But yes, just by show of hands real quick, how many of you were familiar with DTAC? One. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we've got TAP 34, Disaster Planning Handbook for Behavioral Health Services Program. And you can get there by that QR code. Next slide, please. Oh. Okay, this one here is SAMHSA Publications. You can get to it through that QR code, and I went through and I just did a quick search to see if I could find any concepts that were applicable to this convention, and these ones immediately popped up. I have to say there's probably hundreds of them on there, so there's a lot of data to be had in our publications. Next slide, please. So this is our climate change and health equity landing page on SAMHSA. Again, you can get there through that QR code. We just put this here in the event that any of you would like to go check that one out. Next slide. So these are all of our national resources, and this is a fun one for me. I'm always super curious about this, but again, show of hands, how many of y'all have heard of 988? Oh, we're getting better. And the numbers are getting up there. Okay, awesome. So 988 is our National Suicide Crisis Lifeline. And I always like to throw this one out there because I am a veteran. And so if you dial 988 and you hit 1, you will be taken to the Veteran Suicide Crisis Response Line. So we can walk through here and we can see that there's quite a few national resources. Another one that I like to make everybody aware of, though, is the, we've got our Behavioral Health Treatment Services Locator. And I believe, do I have a slide for that? So if you go to the Behavioral Health Treatment Services Locator, it'll take you to a third-party concept, but you can put in some of your demographics, or you put in your location, your zip code, things like that, and it will help you dial in where you can find the nearest mental health or substance abuse facility, which many folks find to be very helpful. Next slide, please. And there it is, perfect. Next slide. And then we wanted to let you all know that we have most of our services, we have them offered in different languages. However, the treatment services locator is available in Spanish. Next slide. Okay, so SAMHSA also has the American Indian and Alaskan Native Behavioral Health Center of Excellence that seeks to advance the behavioral health equity of American Indians and Alaskan Natives. It looks to me like we do not have a QR code for that. However, you can find that at samhsa.gov if you're interested. This is, next slide, please. This is the Opioid Response Network, and we have local consultants in all 50 states, and it's designed to respond It's designed to respond to local needs. So the ORM provides free educational resources and training to states, communities, and individuals in prevention, treatment, and recovery of opioid use disorders and stimulant use. Next slide, please. So again, 988 is the new nationwide 3-digit phone number for mental health crises and suicide prevention. Very similar to 911. It's used for emergencies. 988 serves as a quick and easy to remember number for individuals experiencing a mental health crisis or contemplating suicide, to reach trained professionals who can provide support and assistance. Next slide. So this is the Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Program, and it aims to provide technical assistance and support to rural communities dealing with the opioid crisis. This program offers resources, training, and guidance to help rural communities develop and implement strategies to prevent opioid misuse, expand access to treatment and recovery services, and enhance community resilience. This program is comprised of regional centers with one located in each of the HHS regions, and it looks to me like yours is located at the University of Nevada, Reno. And we do not have a QR code for this, but again, it can be found at samhsa.gov. Next slide. This is the SAMHSA's updated overdose prevention response toolkit that provides guidance to a wide range of individuals on preventing and responding to an overdose. And this QR code will take you to the SAMHSA store where you'll be able to download this toolkit in PDF form. Next slide. Okay, the SAMHSA store. So all current SAMHSA publications are free and can be found at the SAMHSA store, which you can access directly with this QR code. And fun fact, at the top of it now, we have a 988 store. And so if you click on the 988 store, it'll take you to their page, and you can order 988 magnets, stickers, posters, and such, and you can get those delivered straight to your home or office. Next slide. Oh, did I go too fast? Did you get it? Go back, please. Yes, sir. Okay, so Substance Use Prevention Month. This month is the Substance Use Prevention Month. Next slide, please. And our concept for this is telling the prevention story. Next slide. So I went on to SAMHSA and pulled up our toolkit. So our toolkits are interesting in the idea that we've got the social media shareables, we've got website graphics, email signatures, all these kind of stuff. So every month we do this. I don't have them all memorized, but every month is a different awareness month. And we always put out these toolkits. So if anybody's interested in getting a neat prevention month email signature or any graphics or anything like that, they are all free and easily accessible through that QR code. Next slide. Okay, and this QR code takes us to the Tribal Training and Technical Assistance Center. And here you'll find training, technical assistance, collaborative partners, resources, and webinars. And this, there's a plethora of information at that website. I highly recommend checking that one out. Next slide, please. Okay, and so this is the SAMHSA Region 9 Indigenous Community Meeting, and this meeting was brought to you by Carly Blimmel, so I'm going to hand the microphone over to her real quick, and she can tell you all about that.
So this is just an open meeting, like in office hours for Region 9, for Indigenous people in Region 9, whether you're a grantee, whether you're interested in grants, just to kind of talk to other Indigenous communities. Our partners in the Pacific Islands come in and join this session. We do it every other Monday. We did it this week, so next week will be a week off. And it's really just a place for people to connect and see what's working in other communities. I was thinking as Chris was going through the slides, we didn't talk a lot about our grants and grant opportunities. Some people think of SAMHSA primarily as a funding agency. We do the disaster response. SAMHSA does have disaster response grants, I do believe, if you go to the DTAC page. We also have, recently they did a rural EMS grant, I think, for rural and tribal communities, which is pretty cool. I think that's all.
can speak a little more on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have our grant finder, and you can find that on samhsa.gov. And so you go there, type it in. They are called funding opportunities?
FOMOs, yeah.
FOMOs.
NOFOs.
NOFOs. Notice of Federal
Yeah.
Funding Opportunity.
There's a lot
Thank
of
you.
acronyms.
Yeah, there's a lot of acronyms. So you can go there and you will see all of our notices for funding opportunities. And then you can also go through and search through your state to see how many like-minded organizations have gotten grants. And that's one of my favorite ways to connect folks, is you can go in and see who's doing what you're doing and what grants that they were able to successfully apply for. And what's more with our grants is on that same page, you will find links to technical assistant training to help you figure out and navigate through the application process. So with all of that said, the question we were hoping you could think about as I went over all of that is, in what ways can SAMHSA show up for your community in these concepts? And so having seen the resources available and everything that we went over, is there any gaps or concepts that anybody thought of while we were providing all those resources? Any concepts that you could think of that Carly and I could?
Hi, my name is Aya. Thank you for your presentation. I used to work with a group called ITRC, and they were about climate mental health. And they really stressed trauma awareness and just knowing how to identify. I think you gave a short description of it, and it was spot on. But can you talk a little bit more about what you do around trauma education, being trauma informed and all that? Thank you.
Yeah, so SAMHSA in the literature, we gave some examples of some disaster literature, but there's also trauma-informed best practices or centers of excellence, all of those resources that we have. And as part of the disaster behavioral health, they also do emergency first aid toolkits as part of that response as well, and training. So we have some of that. Yeah, thank you. Hopefully that answered your question.
Can you advance the slides for me, please? So that's the QR code for the grant opportunities, if you're interested in seeing what we have available. And then that's the evidence-based practices resource center. So that QR code there should be able to help you with some of those concepts. And then if you would, oh, one moment.
There's a whole half of the room over here that ignore. Sorry.
Did we get it? Okay, next slide, please. And then this is our information. And so all of these questions or any questions that you come up with in the future, we like to say we put people, places, and things together. And so though we've got our expertise, the regional offices, this is my fun one, we're like Captain Planet, with our powers combined, we all have our special concepts. So whatever it is, shoot us an email. I promise you, if we don't know the answer, we know somebody who does know the answer. And all of that said, yep, okay.
Yeah, please reach out and email us. I really do want to hear what you're seeing in your communities. I would love to hear more about what barriers you're encountering to getting services, accessing services. And you had a question, go ahead, because I'm just talking.
Yeah, thanks. So I don't work in this field at all, but of course, probably as many of us, we've had personal experiences with this. And so one thing I'm thinking as you're going through this, like all of these resources, especially for individuals, are really powerful. And I'm just curious, and maybe this is a gap as well, like having like peer-to-peer conversations or resources for peers who are supporting people who are having these like, you know, addiction problems or crises. That's something that I actually have personally looked around for and not had great success finding. So maybe you even have these resources, but that's something that came to mind for me.
100%. Yeah. So we have a lot of peer support concepts. And one of our grants is the CCBHCs, which is the community behavioral health concepts. And so we have peer support groups inside of that. We have a lot of best practices, peer support literature on our website. And again, if you were interested in peer support concepts within your local area, Carly would be a perfect individual to reach out to, because we'll be able to connect you with the local individuals doing that. And we can also put you together with some of our grant recipients that are participating in those things.
Do you want to, or do you want me to?
Any other questions?
Hello. Oh, we have a comment online from
Oh.
Melody Seas, and they said, "Thank you for this presentation. I'm really impressed that we have this information during our conference. It's something we've needed for a while."
Well, thank you so much, Melody.
We were nervous, so that's good feedback.
Yeah, we were. This is the first time we've gone into this realm. More questions? Comments?
I would just like to make a comment. I know within my tribe, we have a lot of people look after the young ones in their mental health and, you know, our elders, but the in-between is where I know that there's a lack of, because, you know, I'm a mom, I'm strong, but like mentally, no, I'm not doing well. And I know that within my tribe, a lot of the mothers and fathers were bringing back our oak trees, and their stories that they had when they were younger, that there were oak trees all over, and then watching them fall, and like it's almost a bare land in some spots, and you can tell that it hurts their feelings, but they're not going to speak about it. So I'm wondering if there's any groups that are out there that you guys know of that have those types of talking circles for like in between, you know, the teenagers and the elders or the adults.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that is something actually that comes up, right? Is especially in Indigenous communities, we find that we have a lot of services for elders and for the youth, and then it's just kind of this gap there. One of the slides in hindsight, after we put the slide deck together, we were like, oh, we should have included some of these other things. But one of the ones is OTAP. It's our Office of Tribal Affairs and Policy. SAMHSA has its own Office of Tribal Affairs and Policy, and they have a lot of programs where they use different culturally based programs. They have funding and they have resources. And then we also have our Native Connections grant under CMHS. So there's some different things there. Native Connections uses a lot of, man, I got distracted. My brain went blank. Uses, what is it called? I'll think about it in a minute. It's a format. GONAs. They use a lot of GONAs. Look at me go. Acronyms. They're just getting me today. So we have 2 minutes left. Chris and I will be here for a minute if you'd like to come and talk. 100% reach out to us through email. I know it's the end of the day, and I appreciate last session of the day. Everybody's ready to go home. One more question. Let's do that. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. It's actually a comment just in response to the last two questions. I don't know any specific tribal resources besides what you guys named, but I do know some other resources for like climate circles or just peer-to-peer listening that could be just useful, such as like the Good Grief Network, where they do a lot of work around processing grief around climate, and anyone would be welcome to that, as well as climate cafes through like the Climate Psychology Alliance. There's a specific North American chapter. And there's a lot of great resources for like virtual sessions, and they also do in-person gatherings in certain regions. And there's also what's it called? There's a nonprofit in the Bay Area called Building a Culture of Empathy, and they do like just active listening, like if you're in a crisis or you just want someone to listen and reflect how you're feeling. And they do also train people how to facilitate empathy circles around all sorts of heavy topics, from existential climate change and all that to just how you're feeling about your day-to-day. So those are some other resources that I'm happy to share with people if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you all for waiting till the end of the day, and everybody be careful going home.
That's it. Yeah.